Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Low Season Traveller Insider Guides. I'm Kate Burgess. Now, I'm sorry to anyone that's listening to this in the Southern Hemisphere who are going through winter at the moment, because this destination is another spot that boasts 300 days of sunshine. Malta. I chatted with Peter from the Malta Tourism Authority about this beautiful, small, but action-packed island. Whether you're interested in history and art, or water sports, or horse riding, or relaxing, this little archipelago has got it. Hope you enjoy. Hi, Peter. Welcome to Low Season Traveller Insider Guides. How are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm very well, thank you. I'm very well. How are you getting on?
I am very well. Also, sadly, in very cold, dark Melbourne. Not summer, but it is what it is. It's also interesting, Peter, this is the second episode that I have done where a destination boasts 300 days of sunshine, with Fremantle in Western Australia being the other one. And continuously I question why I live in a winter destination. Why do I live in the cold? So I'm excited to talk about this beautiful sunshiny place. And the first question I like to ask all my guests is, when you step outside your home in Malta, what do you see, hear, and smell?
Oh man, that's such a difficult question to start off with. Um, there's no real straightforward answer to this, as there isn't just one thing or one aspect that you can pinpoint. And at every different part of the island, it can herald a new sight, a new sound, smell, or even taste. In Valletta, the patter of the tourists and the locals mixing carries right down through the cobbled streets, and the smell of enticing cafes pique your curiosity and kind of tingles your hungry stomach as well. Whereas in Medina, there's no sound, hence why it's known as the Silent City, just the golden alleyways and impressive architecture to marvel upon. In Sliema and St. Julian's, a couple of the resorts, you've got the sounds of the oceans that mingle with the clatter of the restaurants, while succulent meals tease even the most refined of palates. And then over on the island of Gozo, the smell of the clean country air is accentuated with the sounds of the wildlife and the colors of the rolling green valleys. So each part of the island brings with it its own sensory experience that only a full exploration will truly allow you to marvel at the range of the delights that awaits your senses.
Wow, beautifully said. For such a small island, having such a range of locations and different spots, that sounds really interesting. Could you give the listeners a bit of an overview of where exactly Malta is and the best way to get there?
Yeah, of course. So slap bang in the middle of the Mediterranean lies our little beautiful island nation of Malta. It enjoys a prime location between Sicily, which is about 50 miles away, and the northern coast of Africa. And actually, it's been an important stop in ancient maritime routes as well, which is the reason behind its expansive and maybe somewhat turbulent history. I would honestly challenge anyone to find a coastal Mediterranean civilization that hasn't once called Malta home. We had the Phoenicians, the Romans, the Sicilians, Arabs, Ottomans, Turks, French, British, and the most notable were the Knights of St. John, who have all left their imprint and impression on the islands. And I say islands because Malta is actually an archipelago of three different islands. We've got Malta, Gozo, and then the wee island of Comino as well. And I suppose in terms of getting there, the international airport, which was once an old Air Force base, has flights from many major European airports and even further afield. And from a UK perspective, Malta is actually served by no less than 16 UK airports. We also have our own national carrier, Air Malta, who flies all year round and even has a business class offering for those kind of like luxury clientele who wish to start their holiday with an air of excellence. Maybe something even a little bit different for those who are maybe doing a multi-center holiday. You can actually reach Malta by ferry from three different Italian ports, which are Catania, Pozzallo, and Salerno. So if you think you won't have enough to do in Malta on your vacation, which I highly doubt, then you can actually do a combo of an Italian and a Maltese holiday as well.
You mentioned the history there. Obviously, for being such a small island, Malta has an incredibly extensive history. And I know that that's presented and shown in the three UNESCO World Heritage sites. And I am so impressed that it has three UNESCO heritage sites. That is amazing for such a small island. Some countries have one or two and they're quadruple the size. If I knew what quadruple more was, I could say that, but I don't know any word bigger than quadruple. So, what are those three UNESCO World Heritage sites for people to visit?
Yeah, Malta boasts such a diverse kind of history. And across the archipelago, as you said, we do have the three UNESCO World Heritage Sites, which are the city of Valletta, which is a site in itself. We have the megalithic temples, and we also have the Hypogeum. So I'll just break them down a little bit for you. So we'll start with the temples. So these are actually a collective of several different sites found around the islands of Malta and Gozo. So for example, we have the Gigantia temples of Gozo, and they're probably the most notable because they are actually the oldest freestanding stone structures in the world and actually predate the pyramids of Giza and also of that of Stonehenge by around about 1,000 years. And the word Gigantia is Maltese for giant because the legend goes that actually giants built these structures, such as their impressive size. Alongside that, we also have the temples at Hagar Quim. We also have the Tarxian temples, which are down near Valletta. And we also have the Najra temples. I always struggle with that one. So you could even go to Malta and just do a temple tour for those history buffs, such as the impressive array of sites. Next up, we have the Hal Saflieni Hypogeum, which is actually an impressive complex that is cut out from the rock underground and is spread across three levels, dating back around about 5,000 years. It was actually discovered by accident during sort of construction works in the early 1900s, and it's actually considered one of the most impressive and essential prehistoric monuments in the entire world. And maybe one of the top tips is visitation is limited in order to, kind of conserve the site with restricted numbers per day. So I would recommend anyone listening that if you are looking at going, booking round about 3 months in advance to avoid disappointment. And then lastly, we have the city of Valletta. I mean, it's our capital city. It was designated the capital in the mid 1500s, and it was actually planned by the Knights of St. John. And it's rumored that Valletta was the first planned out and mapped out capital city of Europe. And it was named after the Grand Master, Jean Parisot de la Valette, a notable figure in Maltese history as the savior and commander during the Great Siege of 1565. And it is one of the most concentrated historic areas in the world. And we're going to come onto Valletta a little bit later on with a little bit more of what to see and do in Valletta as well. So I'll leave that for then.
So, what would you recommend is the best way to get around? Is it a hiring bites kind of place, walking, or is there some kind of unique Maltese transport? What do you recommend the best way is?
Oh, that's such a great question. Honestly, this will come down to personal preference, as actually all the options that you just touched on are a great way to see the island. So, firstly, given the size of the island, it's actually really easy to navigate around and nothing is ever too far away. So public transport is amazing in Malta. Taxis are in abundance for those kind of shorter journeys, and the buses are all in English. So it's really easy to navigate around through the bus system. And a top tip for a weekly bus pass, it's only around 24 euros, and that allows for unlimited travel during that week-long period. So perfect for those that are looking to get out and about and explore. Hiring a car is also a good option. Around the major cities, traffic can be quite extensive, but away from there and into the resorts and the beyonds, the roads are smooth and they're easy to drive on. And especially given that actually the Maltese drive on the left-hand side of the road, same as here in the UK. So you don't
And
have to get
Australia?
used to the yeah, exactly. So you don't have to get used to that right-hand sideness that we find elsewhere in Europe. Alongside that, for those adventuring to Gozo, especially for those that are staying in a villa, cars are a necessity, but a brilliant way to explore the island and get around those little wee bays around the coast. And the ferry over takes cars, and you don't have to pre-book it. You can just rock up at the port and drive where there's space. Alongside that, we will cover off, but the walking and the biking trails that are all around. There's rental shops all around the resorts and around the island. And again, obviously being on the left-hand side, you don't have to worry too much about your perceptions and awareness because, it's kind of what comes natural to us. We also have tuk-tuks, which are these little, kind of synonymous with the Far East, but we have those available on the island as well to take you around and tour around as well. So there's so many different ways that you can see the island. And again, given our size, nothing is ever too far away. It's fabled that you can get from one side of the island to the other within an hour.
Admittedly, I have never done a podcast where someone has recommended the public transport system. I feel people never have faith in their own public transport. And I am impressed that was the first recommendation that you gave for Malta. And having that 24 euro bus pass, that seems like the easiest way to do it.
I think it's just because, from my own personal experiences and from the own holidays that I've taken and the trips where I've taken people out there, we've used public transport, we've used the bus systems, and it's just been so easy and, much better than other places that I've been, around Europe and even in here in the UK. So I actually always recommend that as a first port of call, because it's just, you can walk out your hotel, you can walk out where you're staying, the bus stops are in abundance, you can get straight on and it takes you to wherever you need to go. And the network is really expansive, so you can get out of the cities, you can go explore the countryside, you can go and explore those, kind of undiscovered maybe towns and villages as well, and really mix and mingle with the locals too. So it's a really great way to see the island.
I love the idea of just jumping on a bus, not knowing where it's going, and see where it takes you. If you're never far away from the hotel, if you can get across the island in an hour, just go for it. So obviously we touched on Valletta earlier, known for its art and its history, being a UNESCO heritage site for a whole city. If a visitor was to spend a day in the capital city, how should they spend it?
Honestly, a day's not enough to squeeze in all the things that there are to do in Valletta. Our capital boasts over 320 attractions, and actually has been given like an unofficial name of an open air museum. So trying to pack all that into one day is just physically impossible. But I'll try and put on my old travel agent hat here to kind of answer this as if I had someone asking me what I can do.
This is why I ask it. I know it's always hard.
Yeah, no, this is the types of questions I used to get as a travel agent. So let me revert back to these ways. So if you had one day in Valletta, I would start at the new city gates. So it's backdropped by the wonderful Triton Fountain, and it is an architectural wonder designed by Renzo Piano. Then once inside the gates, you can head past the Parliament and up beyond the Royal Opera site to the wonderful Upper Baracca Gardens, which actually boast stunning panoramic views right out over the Grand Harbour and over to the three cities opposite. And it's a perfect place, to get those pictures, get those viewpoints, and just have a little sort of landscape in front of you. From here, you've actually then got a number of choices that arise from the magnificent St. John's Co-Cathedral, which is considered one of the finest examples of Baroque in the Mediterranean, and is also home to the largest and only known signed Caravaggio painting in the world, given that Caravaggio was actually once a Grand Master in Malta. Right next door to there is the Museum of Archaeology. So that's for the history aficionados, or maybe you've got the Museum of Fine Arts right next door for the art buffs. From there, you can walk a little bit down the street. You can stop at Cafe Cordina for a light snack, mix with the locals and have a coffee, get the energies back up. And you can also try a pastizzi, which is pretty much the national dish of Malta, and it's a pea or ricotta filled pastry. So again, good for the energy levels, give you a little pick me up. From there, you can head a little bit further into Valletta and actually discover the history of nobility at the Casa Rocca Piccola, which is a wonderful 16th century converted palazzo that's been changed into this kind of, live-in museum. So you can go in and see how they kind of used to live back in the day. And then you can finish your afternoon down by the National War Museum at Fort St. Elmo, uncovering the kind of military history of the area before walking along the waterfront to the lower Baracca Gardens for a different viewpoint from a lower level. Then as we move into the evening, obviously you're going to be a little bit peckish after a full day on your feet, so you can refill your energy levels at one of the Michelin star restaurants that are found pier, either Nonny Undergrain or the Harbour Club. And then you can whittle the evening away down at our famous bridge bar, which actually hosts jazz evenings every Friday night out on the bridge. And such is the abundance of people that come here that the table seating goes right out the window, and people are perched on the bridge, and people are sitting on the stairs all the way down. You can just, sit and enjoy a drink with a air of ambiance with some smooth jazz in the background. Beautiful little location to finish your evening.
That sounds like a pretty awesome day. A really awesome day.
It's a full on day though, isn't it?
It is. That's why you got to spend more time there.
100%, 100%.
Now, with Malta obviously being smack bang in the middle of the Mediterranean, it would be remiss of us to not talk about the water. And obviously, like I said at the beginning of the podcast, you have 300 days of sunshine. So look, you're swimming on most days. So are there any water-based activities that the visitors can get into?
I mean, you're speaking to a water baby here, so I could spend I could spend a full day talking about the water activities and even some of the other activities that we have. But there is literally numerous amounts of activities to do, which range all year round. So when it comes to the water-based activities, there's no better place for us to start than scuba diving. We are the #1 dive destination in Europe and also the #2 dive destination worldwide. We have won that accolade for a number of years, and that's from the professionals. But that's not just their opinion, but actually a personal one as well. I learned to dive in Malta, and having dived elsewhere in the world, it's still one of my favorite experiences and still one of my favorite locations to dive. The hot summers warm the waters around the island, so autumn and even early winter are some of the best times to dive. We're still with that clear visibility, and we have a range of shallow reef dives for the beginners to more experienced cave and wreck diving. And honestly, when you see some of the pictures, some people, it instills fear in them, but it just looks absolutely fantastic. We have sunken World War II planes. There's tugboats through the cave systems, and your nighttime diving. It just looks spectacular. Alongside that, in the last few years, there's also been a rise in popularity of both kayaking and stand-up paddleboarding. And this has led to an upswing in water-based tours involving both these sports. So you can actually join your guide and then discover the landscape from a different view as you cruise around the harbors, the tranquil bays, and even at the base of some of the dramatic cliffs from the comfort of your board or your kayak. And I think you'll appreciate this, potentially being Aussie, but actually something that might surprise you is that when it comes to surfing, Malta is probably not the first destination that comes to mind, but actually the North African winds that swell up during the spring and the autumn actually drive some really excellent breaks, especially in the northwest and the southeast of the island. And this also extends to things like windsurfing and kiteboarding as well. So that's just a few of them. One that's actually quite random as well is water polo is actually a really popular sport in Malta, and actually Malta often competes in the Olympics in water polo as well. So if you want something that's maybe not sea-based but still in the water, you can take part with some of the locals.
And then on the other hand of that, moving on to the land, what are the land-based activities that people can get up to?
Oh, as I say, I honestly feel like we could just do a podcast purely on the activities alone, given that there's that much to do. Okay, so first, we've touched on it briefly, but the walking and the biking trails. So your mild winters and those cooler shoulder seasons, your autumns and your springs, are perfect for getting out and about by foot or by two wheels. And we have a flourishing scene on the island, and you can walk, as I say, those dramatic cliff tops out on the west of the island, or we actually have cycling trails up in the north of the island, which include the old watchtowers from days gone by, and also the windmill trails that are up there as well. So we have a full list of those on our Visit Malta website. For those that prefer something a little bit more leisurely, we have horse riding or even Segway tours at various locations. And then for those that maybe prefer something a little bit more high adrenaline, get the blood pumping, we also have zip lining and Jeep tours and quad bike tours. And one of my favorites that I can recommend is actually the Rolling Geeks tour, which is a self-drive audio tour of the three cities, which is the area opposite Valletta. And it takes you around all the historical sites here, as well as being a unique way to kind of discover the cobbled alleyways and the picturesque civic squares. And I think the first time that I went on one of those was actually a trip with the Malta Tourism Authority. And I can still remember the group leader sitting in the car in front of me with her hands on her head as I nearly crashed it into one of the parked cars at the side of the road. So yeah, just be careful when you are driving around. So
Malta Tourism Authority's top tip: don't crash the cars. Simple.
exactly. Safety first, people.
And as you mentioned as well, Malta consists of 3 islands, Gozo and Comino, that are just a short ferry ride away from the main island. Starting with Gozo, why visit there?
Oh, Gozo is kind of this undiscovered gem of, of the archipelago. I think people tend to just come to Malta and they go to Malta and then they fly home because the airport's on the island. But Gozo is the gorgeous little sister. It's got these rolling green valleys that give way to sleepy, quaint little villages. And there's a real sense of peace here as well. So it's home to the famous Gozo wine, which we'll cover a little bit later on, but it's also the place to be if you want to stay in a traditional farmhouse or a contemporary villa while on holiday, as it's got a real burgeoning scene here. For those that are looking to go hiking amongst the nature, including, the indigenous fauna and the local wildlife, Gozo is your one-stop shop. And then those looking for a little bit of history, we already have those. We have those Gigantia temples, which we've already discussed. But also alongside that, we have the capital of Gozo, which is Victoria. And Victoria has been inhabited for around about 3,500 years, and its ancient bastions actually rise impressively above the more modern city around it. And it gives panoramic views from its ramparts all over the island and even over to Sicily on a clear day. So it is absolutely spectacular. And low season is the perfect time to visit because you won't overheat like you might do in the summer, climbing the crooked lanes to the top. And I'd highly recommend engrossing yourself in the cafe culture of Victoria, mixing with the locals who are proud of their heritage and their history, and they'll regale you with tales and stories of old. So, I mean, again, I could talk about Gozo all day. There's just so much to do there, but I appreciate we're on a time constraint. So we'll go into Comino. So Comino is a really small little island next to it. There's only one house on the island itself. And there's a famous story that the 2 sons of the island took out the 2 cars, drove opposite ways around the island, and then crashed into each other. And it's apparently the only traffic accident that's ever happened in Comino. But given its size, you wouldn't think that there's that much to do at all. But actually, Comino's home to the famous Blue Lagoon, which is probably the most picturesque waters of the archipelago. Crystal clear emerald waters that are an absolute haven for snorkeling and swimming. And I would honestly say avoid the summer because it does get packed here, but the low season is ideal because the waters are still warm and it's less crowds, and it makes it a haven for a morning or an afternoon swim. And then once you're out, and if you want to go for a little walk, there's trails around Comino that you can walk around and enjoy the views over to Gozo and over to the main island of Malta as well. So again, a nice little mix in there. Head over, have a bit of a swim in the morning, grab a bit of lunch, walk it off in the afternoon, get the boat back over to wherever you're staying. Really, really beautiful way to have a nice little day out and relax.
Malta sounds like the most perfect choose your adventure book. It's got huge lists of things to do. You've got a set amount of time. What can you tick? Because there is just way too much going on to get done in one trip for such a small island. I'm very impressed. And on that note, how long would you recommend for people to visit Malta?
I mean, it's such a difficult question because, we've touched on the abundance of things there are to do, from your activities to your history, to your art, your, everything that's there. I mean, Malta attracts many different kinds of tourists for this reason, and everyone who has their own needs and requirements will find something for them on Malta. From the city breakers who are there for 2 to 3 days, you can stay in Valletta, you can see the sights and attractions of Valletta, and also the 3 cities opposite for an alternative city break. For those traditional week-long, holiday makers, again, you've got the capital, you've got the villages and cities surrounding it. You've then got the island of Gozo if you wanted to do a day trip, or even for the long stay market, for those that want to stay for 2, 3, even 4 weeks, you can have a couple of weeks of downtime and a couple of weeks doing all the sites. I mean, if it was me personally, I would probably recommend somewhere in the realms of a week to 10 days. And that gives you ample time to experience the abundance of experiences and opportunities. You can have a couple of days doing, I suppose, the main sites, if you wanted to call them that, but then you can have a few days taking in those experiences that are a little bit lesser known, like the areas of Medina or Rabat. And then you can also have a couple of days on the island of Gozo and in the natural beauty and of the island after the hustle and bustle of the main island. So really break it down a little bit and just have lots of fun to start with, bit of chill time afterwards, and then go home rested and rejuvenated.
It certainly sounds like the place I would want to be right now. As you were answering my question, it just started absolutely storming down here in Melbourne. So I would much prefer to be in Malta at the moment. And if you say that there's no real amount of time that's worth it, maybe I'll just move there, get out of this little rain hole.
6 months there, 6 months in Melbourne. There you go. Split it up nice and easy.
Perfect. Peter, thank you so much for joining us. Looking forward to chat to you on Thursday a little bit more about the Maltese culture.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you very much for having me.
Join Peter and I again on Thursday when we discuss the progressiveness and inclusivity that Malta has adopted for the LGBTQI plus community, the epic parties, and of course, my favorite things, the food and wine. If you have any feedback or destinations you would like to hear more about, message us on Instagram, Facebook, or LinkedIn at Low Season Traveller. Keep your travel dreams alive, and more now than ever, travel is better without the crowds.